You're listening to Music Tectonics.
Hi, welcome to Music Tectonics. I'm Tristra Newyear Yeager, and today I'm joined by Eleanor Rust. We're both part of the team at Rock, Paper, Scissors, the music tech PR firm, and we're both gearing up for our big annual music tech event, Music Tectonics, which will be happening both in the metaverse, somewhere floating in the ether, and in LA this autumn. So, but don't worry, this whole podcast will not be an ad for the conference. We're just trying to get you psyched up by talking about some of the latest news. So, Eleanor, why don't you let folks know about your role in Music Tectonics and why you're here with me today?
Hey, Tristra. So my role at Music Tectonics is a lot about getting the word out. So if you've gotten newsletters or information about registering for the conference, that comes from me. I have so many things I am excited to share about Music Tectonics in the coming weeks. So I'm just going to tease some topics here, and maybe we can talk a little bit about what's happening in the news that's getting us excited about bringing people together to discuss these topics at the conference in October and November. So one thing everybody's talking about, of course, is NFTs, but we're also thinking about what the future is for digital collectibles. What's it going to take for a mass music audience to really fall in love with digital collectibles and bring them to the rest of their online lives? We're also looking at a lot of what's going on with just the whole audio space. Music is taking its place in a whole audio universe, from podcasts to interactive audio to Clubhouse and all of its clones. So so let's dive into some of the exciting stories that have been happening lately.
Oh, absolutely. So what I was thinking is we can hit on some themes that are kind of, that will help us weave together this news and turn it from sort of disparate rando information that we get in all these newsletters, etc., and into something that starts to tell an interesting story about where we are in music tech. So as you mentioned, Eleanor, digital collectibles. It's, we kind of started out last year with this amazing, NFTs have been around for a while, a relatively long while, if we're talking in like crypto blockchain terms. But everybody kind of woke up to them when some major auctions happened. And one of those first really let's call it a big hit auctions came from an artist named Blau. That's with the 3 instead of the B in front. And this electronic artist kind of made a big splash because he sold an NFT at a really, really high price. And then there were other folks like Grimes and some other people that the sort of usual suspects you'd expect to jump on this kind of bandwagon, who also did some pretty rip-roaring sales when it comes to auctions. However, we're sort of kind of seeing things shifting gears a little bit. Obviously, there's only so many people in the world that can drop a couple mil on, what's effectively a JPEG with an MP3 and a special file protocol behind it. So we're looking at artists really digging into what is going to make a difference for them in the long run. And Blau, once again, is leading the pack with what he's calling Royal. It is a platform. So in general, we're seeing artists founding platforms instead of just putting out, NFTs or kind of cooperating with an existing marketplace to hold an auction. And Blau is focusing in particular on music rights and royalties, which is a very interesting area. Like crypto, whenever you start selling future revenues on an asset, you start to wiggle towards the securities world. So I know Blau in the coverage has mentioned that he's got lawyers looking into this. That's going to be an interesting space to watch.
Right.
To see. Yeah.
It's a new gray area. These areas that used to be really cordoned off from each other. What happens when musicians' sales start to look like securities? How is that regulated?
Yeah, and there's for certain formats, there's already, the SEC has already approved under Reg A the sale of of shares of future revenue on various assets like publishing rights, etc. And that's really exciting. But like when you add NFTs to the mix, how's that going to play out? That's going to be interesting. And,
Yeah.
interesting in the sort of curse, the sort of curse
Right.
context. Yeah, it's
Right.
going to be very interesting.
It is exciting to see artists' entrepreneurial bent come back to music. That we've heard so much about artists talking about their music really being the loss leader, and the money they make is from their other business ventures in fashion, in endorsements, in celebrity appearances, etc. And so it's really exciting to see like the story of immersive entertainment that was just announced. Flow Rida and other partners, tying NFTs to a streaming platform to bring it back to listening to distributing music.
Yeah, and the fact that these, Flo Rida and his team are talking about ENFTs, in that they are immersive, so spelled with an E, because that's the name of their company. So I think they're trying to think of what can we do with NFTs to make it much more of an interesting experience for music fans, for entertainment fans. So it's not just like the glory of owning this kind of file, but that there's also some sort of interactive thing, which is another aspect of NFTs that we're going to get to explore more at Music Tectonics. I mean, there are folks like Async Art that do programmable NFTs that have different layers, and you can mess around with them and make them respond to different parameters. It's really cool stuff. So this is like, we're just at the beginning of how we could turn these digital assets or digital collectibles into something that feels truly exciting and that really departs from the pre-NFT norms, like breaking away from what, from physical objects and imitating them, or, collectibles as we think of them now in the physical world. So there's a lot of really cool stuff happening.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to it breaking away from this sort of commentary on the art market, which I feel is kind of how it burst into the news, being so much about the value is what you'll pay for it. But there's so much potential in bringing it to mass audiences, to making it part of how artists own their rights, and how ordinary fans, not just crypto savvy ones, interact with their favorite artists and with the music they love.
Yeah, the user interface. If you talk to folks at places like Audius, or if you talk to, I've heard some feedback from artists about using certain NFT marketplaces. Minting an NFT is not all that straightforward. And if you're an artist who's got like 50 other aspects of your career and assets to manage, you're not gonna spend 5 hours like figuring out how to mint a fucking NFT. You're gonna that's how to mint an NFT. You're going to just move on or come up with something else that you'd rather do. So getting the artist interface right and getting the fan interface right is going to be really, really key to mass adoption. And fortunately, there's been a ton of progress on the fan side or on the purchaser side. And it sounds like there's a lot of ideas about how to make it better for artists minting things. So I want to talk now about, this is sort of getting a little meta, Eleanor.
Yes.
But I want to talk about audio. So talking about audio in a podcast, we're podcasting about podcasting or something. I'm
already dizzy.
So there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on that isn't necessarily front and center in maybe music tech folks' minds. And one of the things, I just saw a story today in The Guardian about, this is today, meaning a few days ago for those of you listening at home, but there is a great article about a record label that specializes in creating albums to go along with novels. So this sort of super enhanced audiobook experience, since audiobooks are growing at a much faster rate than print books. So print books had a great year in 2020. So that whole area is really, really lively. And music is starting to play a bigger and bigger role in audiobook experiences, thanks in part, I think, to podcasts, both fictional and nonfiction podcasts. So that space is starting to get super interesting. One thing you mentioned that was kind of cool was Clubhouse. And it was. What are your thoughts on that?
It's so interesting how hot it was for what felt like a brief amount of time. Launched so many clones, and even though it's no longer sort of like the hot exclusive Clubhouse that it felt like it was in the spring. It definitely opened up people's eyes to social audio and its potential. I just saw a news story that Clubhouse is considering adding spatial audio so that you have more of a sense of being in the room. And so I think that all points to this bleeding over of audio silos, right? That we had podcast in their little silo and audiobooks in their silo and music in its silo. And now things like Clubhouse are showing how people really are hungering to cross those experiences, to get interactive. That social audio isn't just the holy grail of social music that nobody seems to have really quite got right yet. It's all of these kinds of audio experiences.
And the interesting thing, Eleanor, is each one of these silos had its own very specific model. So
Yes.
if you're looking at an audiobook, you're paying about the same as a print book or an ebook. If you're looking at a podcast, you may be paying everything from nothing to a tiny fraction of your monthly subscription to maybe you're supporting that podcast on Patreon, or you go to Stitcher Premium or something and sign up for it. And then you look at music, and there's a really interesting bit of commentary recently from Music Business Worldwide, which asked an important question, which is Spotify is giving podcasters perks. Why don't independent music artists get these same perks? So the perks
Yes.
being the ability to create a subscription approach.
To actually be monetized through Spotify directly to fans rather than
Exactly.
only getting a streaming payout, but also the capacity to directly contact your fans, to actually get the
Yes.
contact information, which is something that artists have been clamoring for, and something that, a whole minor industry is built around understanding fan behavior on Spotify, because it's just not there in Spotify for artists. And Music Business Worldwide pointed out that Spotify toyed with the idea of bringing more creator tools like that to artists when they started to think about getting into digital distribution a couple of years ago, when they bought or at least a share in DistroKid.
Yep.
and beta tested direct uploads to Spotify that would then push to other streaming services, and then they got cold feet. So they're able to
Understandably.
give this. Sure. It's
I would
good.
not want to be in charge of the Spotify team trying to get Apple Music to, hey, this guy uploaded this shit here. And
Right,
of course it's good. Of course it's not. And trying to, detecting fraud, detecting all sorts of other content
Yes.
problems. Yeah.
Yes.
No fun.
They must have realized why it's a complicated problem.
Yes.
But it's interesting that they decided that it's worth it for podcasting, perhaps to woo the podcasters who are already getting access to that on other platforms.
Like Stitcher and Apple. Yep.
Exactly. Perhaps even to woo them away from independent subscriptions through something like Patreon.
Yep.
We'll
yeah,
see.
it's going to be a very interesting time. The other interesting aspect of all this is there's already sort of an ad ecosystem for podcasts. Now, it's one that has trouble. Excuse
Right.
me.
Well, it's
it's had some of the same problems. Yeah.
Right, but it's constructed so differently than many ad environments. It does, I guess, because it's developed recently. It's not saddled with the internet advertising problems. It doesn't have the growing pains of the early 2000s. So
and the host role is so important. So, I'm obsessed with, Enter Product X here is a great selling point when it comes to selling these ads. And how that would work for an audiobook or music. I mean, I could totally imagine.
Can you imagine product placement in an audiobook?
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine it, but I don't know if readers or listeners are going to want to imagine it. And then what if you're listening to an album and then all of a sudden you're going totally fangirl on this MC or whatever, or it's someone like an electronic music artist who's mostly instrumental or uses feature vocals or whatever, and all of a sudden this dude breaks in and mumbles something about how he's obsessed with a certain energy drink or something, and you're like, this is so. That would totally harsh your mellow, for lack of a better way to put it.
It's true. There was a good piece from Real Life about why podcast ads seem to be so compelling, and why platforms like Amazon and Spotify seem to be willing to invest so much more in podcast advertising right now. Just talking about how even an ad that is a humorous take, even if it's seems to be almost poking fun at the product, it's still powerful for name recognition. It's powerful because people don't skip over podcast host read ads as much as they would any other kind of advertisement. So there's something about that building it into the podcast experience that makes it powerful and valuable. So I'm wondering if the future of that kind of audio advertising might shape more around the spoken word experiences that you might gain as a super fan rather than the music experience. We'll see. There was a story about Amazon. This was a few weeks back now, but a story about Amazon's leaning into buying popular podcasts. And Bloomberg was talking about how this makes sense for Amazon, who is a little behind on the compared to advertising juggernauts like Facebook. Right? That Amazon leaning into podcast advertising, it's digging into that marketplace that's a little less over determined, a little less. It's a little more Wild West still.
And in general, Amazon has been pursuing a pretty aggressive ad policy. I think it's after cloud services is probably one of their fastest growing and most profitable segments, or whatever you want to call it, business units. So ads are incredibly important to Amazon. And yeah, I think that makes sense. They're trying to occupy this space, kind of like they've done with a lot of their content plays. Like they try to find an audience or a space that's been really poorly served and go after it with guns ablazing. And it looks like that's what's happening too, though I'm sure there's going to be some interesting fallout from that, in that, traditional ad strategies may prove less desirable to the core podcast audience.
Interesting. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how this Wild West gets regulated. How this Wild West becomes suburbanized.
One other big, very hot space that is, it's become a buzzword of sorts, is the quote unquote creator economy. And, I read a lot about the creator economy, and part of me is like, I don't quite think anyone really knows what they mean when they say creator economy, but let's talk about it in terms of music. In some ways, you see a lot of interesting developments that suggest that the creator economy is merging with the fan economy, or that there's going to become this sort of, benevolent circle of life for content. So in this case, an artist records a really cool track and maybe puts out some of the stems, and then fans remix it or make tributes to it, or, all these things. And in fact, I was thinking about this, this morning, that fandom has almost always been a way that works of art can have new life on the internet, right? So what are some of the first things that really flourished on the internet? No, not gambling and not adult material, but also fan fiction, right? Exactly. Fan fiction, fan art, all those things finally found a home because, it's really hard when you're in, suburban Topeka to go out and find the other person that's really obsessed with, Babylon 5. Like, it's really hard to find them in person, but you can find them online fairly simply. And then you can start to exchange really weird stories that you've made up about your favorite characters, taking them into places that maybe no one ever imagined they would go.
Right. And those felt like secret subcultures at the time. But we're now seeing those, that sort of fan creativity come much more to the fore. And I think social media platforms where the creator economy flourishes have a lot to do with that. Aren't there studies about how school children today, their aspirational figures are YouTube creators, because they watch YouTube videos, they see YouTubers doing fun things. they'd love to do the same thing. And I think every place where where creators and influencers flourish leads to imitation, leads to emulation, and it definitely feels circular. I'm curious to see how it evolves as generationally, right? Is that circle going to remain a circle, or are we going to kind of keep spiraling forward, right? Is the influencer of tomorrow really going to look like the influencer of today? And how is a circular economy going to work?
Yeah, it's definitely, there's a great, I bring this novel up a lot because it's just such a great example of what could happen. Werner Vange has a novel called Rainbow's End. My apologies to all our listeners who've heard me go on about this before. I don't think I've done it on the podcast, though. So Werner Vange imagines a world where you can instantly use, like, say, this cool dinosaur that someone made in Peru in your virtual environment, and you do like a micropayment that instantly goes to that creator and their collaborators in like a predetermined split, right? So it's kind of a fantastic fantasy that I think a lot of us in music tech and in friction,
no friction, no waiting for payouts, no black box. That sounds amazing.
Yeah. And in fact, there are lots of folks that are trying to build maybe the first layer of this this kind of system, including things when people talk about DeFi. So that's blockchain-powered financial tools, or even just traditional microfinance. So services for artists that allow them to not have to wait until they get their quarterly payout, or not have to wait to make the most of whatever assets they have. Look, so if you know that you're at the peak of your career and you're in the pop music business, like now is the time when you're going to have the most value. And maybe you want to capitalize on that to take some of that value out and turn it into a new project and have some capital to invest. So that whole world of creator tools I find really fascinating, because I think they're just starting to have an impact on how people make stuff. And not to get too Marxist here, but like the economic underpinnings are always going to influence how culture expresses itself and what people are going to think of to do and be able to do. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens on that front. I mean, is it going to change some of the power dynamics? Is it,
That's a good point. Yeah. It's in some ways it's a logical flow from the rise of crowdfunding. But I'm really glad to see alternatives to that, right? I mean, I think the most vocal person about that, of course, is Amanda Palmer. But when you're crowdfunding, you're depending so entirely on banking on your persona, not on other elements of your talent, right? It turns the artist from just a creator to a creator and also a fundraiser. And not everybody's career is, careers can be lucrative, but still not suitable for crowdfunding.
And a lot of artists, a lot of musicians want to make music. They don't want to make videos about why you should fund their next album. And so
they don't want to do TED Talks about why you should crowdfund.
And crowdfunding is also, it's like, what if you are from a community where you you have a lot of fans, but none of them have a lot of money to send to you. But those fans may have, they have value as human beings, and the relationship between music and listener is like a whole other thing. But they also, if you have an audience, they may have you may have some clout in ways that can't translate instantly into $100 donation in return for a T-shirt or whatever. Like, either whether your fans are really young, like you make music that 11-year-olds love, or your fans are again from a part of the world or a marginalized community where there isn't a ton of just money flowing free. That is, that's a question, and it kind of favors the already favored. So.
Exactly.
Or the people with really great networks. And that's not necessarily the people who will make the best music. No offense, Amanda, but. So another interesting thing in the creator tools world is we're seeing all sorts of different workflows emerging. So if you look at like a map of the kind of things that have received investment in the quote unquote creator economy, some of them are back office kind of things like financial stuff, like whether it's money management or how to generate capital or how to from your existing quote unquote assets, all that stuff. And then there's stuff about like, how do you make what you make? And that's another category of, startups that have gotten some pretty decent funding. The music space, it's not quite as active at this point, though maybe it will be once we see some other things come together in the business. But it's interesting to start to see that there are sort of different layers or different communities of creators who prefer different tools and different workflow. So, I mean, it's kind of, we've talked about the democratization of distribution. I think we're getting to the democratization of creation in a whole new way. That is a big change from even 5 years ago, right? Where you had, maybe you had like the professional studio versus the home studio, the bedroom producer, the prosumer, like there are all sorts of nomenclature for that person.
But everybody had to go get their tracks mastered from an expert.
Or
whether they were in a home studio or a...
they had to have some kind of hardware in their studio. Right. So they needed a desktop or a really good laptop. They needed some preamps, maybe. They needed a decent microphone if they were recording anything acoustically. But now things are starting to get more and more streamlined so that you can basically record some pretty decent music on your phone. You may still need a mic, but maybe you don't. Maybe I don't know. There's a lot of interesting vocal plugins and things rolling out that could change that too.
There's so many ways to get started. And as you said, it's that different levels and types of creators can access what works for them and move up rather than there being a really high bar to just get a track down.
Absolutely.
Yeah. In fact, we're going to have a lot more on this specific topic coming up on the podcast because we have a number of interesting sponsors in the music creator space. If you've been following Music Tectonics for a while, you might remember that in 2019, our inaugural conference, the focus was really on recorded music. Then in 2020, when we went online and everyone was wondering about live streaming, we added live streaming and live music in general to the conference lineup. This year, we're adding a third arm of the music industry, music creation. So we're getting a lot of great support on this from some leaders like BandLab. You heard from Meng Kwok of BandLab recently. Any conversation with him is pretty mind-blowing.
Yes.
We also have Native Instruments and Lander, the AI mastering app. You're going to be hearing from them.
Oh, they're not just mastering too, and they have actually a bunch of creator tools as well that are pretty from samples and things like that. Some other So this is a really exciting space, and we've been interested in watching it grow, and we're so excited to have more on this topic at the conference and on the podcast coming up. Speaking of live music, which, do you like that segue? Oh my gosh, live music. What in the world is going on? My heart breaks for promoters, presenters, artists, all the crew, because, we had the Hotback Summer. Festivals started to announce. Everything was picking up steam. Everyone was super excited. And then, oh my gosh, then the Delta hit, and now we're looking at a really interesting, crazy patchwork of mandates, canceled tours, festivals that happen and like Lollapalooza don't end up being, super spreader events. Thank goodness. You have some that do end up being super spreader events. It just seems to be such a mixed bag, and everyone's trying to sort of feel their way forward in the dark without having much of an idea
I think
of what's going to help.
Everyone was hoping that some of those initial events would serve as models. But you're right, the patchwork approach seems to have reigned, and nothing seems to have come up on top yet. It's heartbreaking.
The major tour cancellations, those kind of things really knock the wind out of the sails. So, I think that has a dampening effect even, of course, when Garth Brooks cancels his tour, his fans are disappointed and it gets complicated. But then you look further down to like an emerging artist who maybe is playing around Nashville. And when people hear that Garth Brooks has canceled his tour, do they really want to go out and hear this exciting new artist play in a venue? Nashville's been great about mandating, I believe they've mandated vaccines in all their venues and masking and all that. So a lot of the venues have done better works than the states are in. But that said, it's really sad because artists are both hankering to get out there and play for the people that love their music, but they're also, that they're struggling.
Right.
And it's just really, it's heartbreaking. So hopefully we'll get to talk about some of the things to look forward to at Music Tectonics. We always try to take a more constructive approach,
Yes.
though grieving the present may be valuable too. But everyone was kind of wondering what would happen with live streaming, and it feels like that's still going to remain kind of undecided and in the air until we actually get settled into a more regular rhythm with live music.
Yes, it's going to be super interesting how individual artists decide to continue to incorporate live stream into their schedule, into the ways that they interact with fans. I really hope we can get to that point where we've got touring for the artists who want to keep touring, and live streaming as part of that ecosystem instead of a replacement.
The other last thing, I always love to talk about licensing. Speaking of heartbreak, I heard once from a CEO in a B2B music company that is involved a lot with publishing that, he basically knows that sooner or later he's going to get sued. And we've seen ongoing evidence of that lately. And most recently from, I'm sorry guys, but from Bang Energy Drinks. And this was not the only case of this, where a brand got sued for using music in a social media campaign that they thought they had licensed for other purposes. So, trying to figure out the complexities of music licensing, even for pretty well-established brands who are probably using very reputable agencies, remains difficult. It's just it's really sad. Or another case I think that was widely mourned was there was a bot on Discord, a music bot.
Yeah.
Yes.
R.I.P. Groovy.
Yeah, and folks really enjoyed what Groovy brought to their Discord servers. And now it's like, how did this happen in 2021? That it's and I'd love actually listeners, if somebody out there can explain exactly where Groovy went wrong, that I would love to hear it. So drop us an email or even send a voice recording if you want to.
My understanding of it from using Groovy just a little bit is that YouTube allows for at least social sharing, right? Is that you can easily tweet a link to a YouTube video and have it play in that platform. And so Groovy used YouTube's API to allow people to basically automate doing that. Add this to our playlist, and people can basically create a playlist within Discord collaboratively, and then have it play on audio meetups. And I think it's that gray area between using YouTube's share function and automating something and bringing it into a different environment. I'm not entirely. YouTube says that this breaks the terms of their terms and conditions, because they are not supposed to.
It's probably public performance is where it gets snagged, because you're playing it for multiple people in a quote unquote public or quasi public space.
So specifically modifying the service and using it for commercial purposes, because Groovy does have a premium level. You can use Groovy.
Man.
Yeah, you can use. You can install Groovy for free, but there was a way that they were monetizing it.
So just a word to the wise out there: if you're starting a new music service and you're using an API from a well-established other platform, like really dig in deep and try to find somebody who can inform you about how likely it is that you'll get shut down.
Yeah, it sounds like Groovy was a real sort of cottage operation, that it started out as a personal project. Discord is full, Discords are for tinkerers, right? And so it started as a personal project, and I bet it just grew from people working on it organically, and probably never never vetted by music lawyers. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
social music. We mentioned it before when we were talking about the way audio silos are breaking down and the way things like Clubhouse show how interested people are in social audio of lots of different kinds. But we still haven't seen anyone crack that social audio nut.
Yeah, it seems to be. Well, I've actually asked some folks that were thinking very hard about social music for their own commercial purposes. And one of the interesting insights I got was that the way people socialize around music in general, we're not talking about like the serious, music obsessed minority, that 1% of fans that are just like, do love to be like, oh, have you heard this, or trade tracks back and forth, or really really obsessed about the music itself. If you're talking about people that are more see music from more of an entertainment lens, most of what you do at a live music event isn't really around the music. Like, you kind of listen, but most of it's like talking to your friends, right? So, and the ambiance, the being in that space where there's music happening, it adds an energy to the social experience that, is great, but it's not really about the music. So just like the opera, right, was never really about the opera. It was about going and putting on your fabulous frock and seeing who was with whom and,
Those
what was going
glasses
on.
are for looking at the audience, not for looking at the singers.
Exactly. So, in some ways, a lot of the fan-centric platforms may have more of a future if we're talking about social activity.
Right.
And they also may lead to some discovery, right? There's always going to be that forward-thinking fan that's like, yeah, I love Blackpink, but you really need to check out this new group, or there's a solo project, or there's this or that. So, there's a lot of, I think in some ways we may crack it via fandom as opposed to
that's really interesting.
straight up like, because there are already ways to share music for the diehard music obsessed person, of which I count myself one. And, sending playlists to people and stuff like that. And then they send something back and, and you can do this all via text. So
That's how we do it at the office.
why would I go to a separate platform? I mean, you really would have to add for the, and then for the sort of general folks who are like, yeah, music's nice and I like to listen to this or that. Like, it's not necessarily going to be, they can socialize in other formats. And I don't know.
Yeah, are you aware of a fandom engagement platform that's added music listening? I'm curious if that's on the way, or if
That's a good question.
or if that's just the next step, right? That's
well, I know there are platforms like there's services like Vertigo that now are really focused on artist lounges, and those can be whether it's artist themed lounges that fans initiate, or the artist is actually going to chime in on chat and be like, hey, party people, here's my new remix or whatever. So they've, they actually were originally a social media app, and they're focusing on something else. So, it's a really, really interesting space. So I think the fans are the key, and understanding how fandom works and why people engage with music. No one's quite gotten there, but I think you're right. If they start adding music listening, we might see some really interesting developments.
Especially if it combines with the fans' creativity. We were talking about how fandom has always been about, or at least internet fandom has always been about fans expressing themselves, fans expressing their love of an artist creatively. It'll be interesting to see that circular economy. We were talking creator economy, how that evolves with social music too.
Well, thanks for nerding out with me, Eleanor.
It's always a pleasure to nerd out with you, whether it's about Mongolian theater or Indiana folklore.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance. Yeah, I didn't get a chance to mention Genghis Khan on this podcast. Oh, I just did. There we go.
Take a shot, everybody.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us today, and we'll be back next week with more fun conversations, not with just me and Eleanor, but with other interesting leaders and thought leaders in the music tech world on music tectonics.
We have so much planned this summer. It's going to be amazing. And into the fall. So I hope I'll see everybody at Music Tectonics online from October 25th to October 27th. And if you are up to come to LA on November 2nd, I will be there for the in-person event. I think, Tristra, you will be too, won't you? Fingers crossed.
Yes, that is the hope. I'm really excited to be released from the Midwest on parole for a short period, and it'll be really awesome to ride a carousel.
Yes, I can't wait.
I mean, also talk to all you wonderful people. I'm not just going.
I
to
mean, ride a
I
carousel while
promise.
talking about music tech. It's the dream. Living the dream.
I mean, that's the dream come true. That's so true.
Thank
All
you.
right, thanks everybody.
We are thrilled to announce that Will Page and Vicki Nauman will sit down for a fireside chat at Music Tectonic's 2021 conference. Will Page just came out with an amazing book, Tarzan Economics, that distills essential principles for pivoting through disruption. He's learned those lessons through 20 years of watching the rise and fall of the music industry's fortunes as former chief economist at Spotify and other leading companies. Come to Music Tectonics to get Will's insights on how the pandemic accelerated disruptions to the music industry and what's next on the horizon. He'll be in conversation with Vicki Nauman, tech-savvy consultant and music industry connector. Will and Vicki's fireside chat will be part of the online conference October 25th to 27th. But don't forget, one ticket also lets you join safe in-person events on November 2nd in Los Angeles. Get your Music Tectonics ticket at musictectonics.com.
Thanks for listening to Music Tectonics. If you like what you hear, please hit subscribe on your favorite podcast app. We put out new episodes every week. Want more? Find it at musictectonics.com. You can dig deeper into this episode, learn about our annual conference, get the Music Tectonics app, and sign up for our newsletter. MusicTectonics.com has it all. Also, look for Music Tectonics on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Clubhouse. And connect with me, Dmitry Vitsa, on LinkedIn. Peace.
You're listening to Music Tectonics.